I was really trying to get through all of the terrestrial biomes in one go, but I got timed out. I'm sorry. So guess what? We have one more, and then we go aquatic. But last but not least, we have subtropical desert. You know what a desert is? Like, did you know it's technically called a subtropical desert? And why? Why do you say this? Do you remember when we talked about the Hadley and Farrell cells and where there's that lack of overlap between them? And there tends to be this dead area of air? Yeah, that's pretty much it. So basically along 30 degrees north and south latitudes. So there's all sorts of, you think of Sahara Desert, you think of our deserts in the western United States, Middle East, all that. Yeah, pretty much. Australia, yeah. Trees, no, not so much. This is where we have those water holding on to organisms and plants, cacti, euphorbs, succulents. So these are the types of plants that are going to thrive the best here. They store that water for that long time storage and use. Look how little rain they get. Here, the one on the left, this is in Arizona, and this is representing, obviously, their temperature change. It gets really freaking hot in the summer, and it can get cool at night because there's not a lot of cloud cover, as we talked about with one of the other biomes, and because of that, it doesn't trap a lot of heat, and in this night, it can get pretty cool. But during the day, also extremely hot, and yeah, no rain, almost no rain. Okay, let's take it to the water. So aquatic biomes are something that we also need to talk about because they are as equally important as our land biomes, our terrestrial ones. And so we're going to kind of differentiate these between freshwater and marine biomes. So freshwater are things like rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, and wetlands. Marine are oceans, estuaries, oceans including the intertidal zone, coral reefs, all that good stuff. How do we categorize them? Salinity. So are they freshwater, saltwater? How deep do they go, the depth? And water flow. Is it stagnant, like landlocked, and it's just there? Or is that water allowed to flow like a river? So let's start there. All right, so streams and rivers. Streams and rivers are going to be flowing fresh water, and it could sometimes originate from underground springs and aquifers that reach up to the surface, or it could be due to snow melt and rain runoff. Streams are typically narrower, creeks even smaller. Rivers tend to be larger, wider, but they can, get to wider points and narrow points depending on the geography that they're moving through. Remember, water takes the path of least resistance, so it tends to be kind of in a natural valley type area anyways. Lakes and ponds. So these are, if they're not completely locked by land, then there's going to be some kind of river, creek, stream inlet typically, or it could be spring-fed or man-made and filled by man. Those tend to be called reservoirs, more so than just lakes and ponds. Lakes are bigger than ponds, but they can have fairly similar wildlife that live there, unless you start talking about huge lakes like the Great Lakes and things like that. There are different zones when we talk to lakes and ponds. So as you start in let's say you're, you went to the lake and you're fishing on the shore here, you're still on the terrestrial part. There's sometimes a little shore, a little beachy area. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's just straight up weeds right until you get there. Now, where you're going to be casting into, whenever you first go swimming, you jump into the lake or the pond. This is what we call the littoral zone. And this is the shallow area. There's a lot of silt. It's kind of squishy underneath your feet. And this is where a lot of algae and those plants tend to grow. Light does tend to penetrate through there. The limnetic zone is more of the open water. There's not nearly as many plants that are going to be living out there unless they are floating plants. The only photosynthetic things, living organisms you would find there would be things like phytoplankton. And again, that's going to be in the larger bodies of water, or smaller ephemeral, meaning short-lived. Now, this area here, the euphotic zone, this is the part that light can penetrate down to. That's why it gets dark. So the euphotic zone is the area where light can get to. Now, let's talk about the deeper parts. We have the profundal zone, and that's where sunlight really can't get there, and producers just are not going to be able to survive because there's no light. Benthic means bottom. So this is going to be that muddy bottom where the catfish live and all that good stuff. And there's not a lot going on down there. Really not. Okay, now, freshwater wetlands. These, sometimes they are submerged all year. Sometimes they are just partially submerged. Most of the year. Sometimes they are, again, as I said, ephemeral, meaning that they can come and go depending on if it's a rainy season or a dry season. The other terms for these would be things like swamps, marshes, and bogs. So I like this picture because it shows you a little bit of each one. The swamp, a swamp is going to be represented by larger trees, sometimes long-standing bodies of water. There can be lots of mosquitoes and those kinds of things. Marshes and bogs, these are going to be the more ephemeral type, where it's going to be more seasonal, and once that water evaporates or sinks in, finally percolates down, then it'll dry. It'll become a drier region of land again. Okay, so now we're going to go from pure freshwater to kind of a little salty. Yeah, we're going to be a little salty. So here are salt marshes along the coast and, mostly the temperate climates. Not many trees, but it's going to be lots of reeds, cattails, that kind of stuff. And salt marshes are, again, as we talked about how tropical rainforests are very productive, salt marshes are also very productive. Mangroves. I liked this picture a lot better than the one that was in your textbook. Mangroves are warmer because they're more in the tropical and subtropical regions, and their tree roots are completely submerged underwater. They're very salt tolerant, meaning that those plants can tolerate changes in the salt, the salinity of the water. But they're extremely important because what they do is they help protect the coastline from erosion. Because of those roots, they kind of help prevent that erosion from occurring, and, hurricanes and storm damage. Now let's get salty. Let's talk about the intertidal zone. This is probably one of the roughest, most difficult biomes to exist and live in if you're a living organism. And the reason why that is because it changes several times a day. It's a tiny part of the coastline where it's right kind of beneath where you'd go to the beach and where the tide comes in and out. So some areas, nice and smooth. Other areas where it's extremely rocky, you'll have pools that will exist in between tides, or maybe for a month or two. You will have areas where they stay underwater much more. But you have to really have to kind of hold on to things. So a lot of the organisms here are either very slow moving, or they will basically adhere themselves permanently to a structure like a rock or something like that. So here you can see some of the organisms that are more likely to see in these zones. Again, they have to be very hardy in order to survive. Here's another nice picture of an intertidal zone. This is where the tide is down, not high. Okay, coral reefs. Again, very, very productive biome. Warm, shallow waters all around the world. This is the most diverse marine biome, and again, kind of depending on where you are in the world as to the exact species that you'll see there. But the corals are an amazing organism. And because, they look like rock, but no, they are not. They have They are full of life, and that is what helps propagate the other organisms in the area to thrive. Now, the bad thing is humans. Humans are having a really bad impact on corals. There's a lot of things that can cause coral bleaching, and we are starting to learn more and more. We know now that there are obviously certain chemicals and things like that once they get into the water, they can kill the coral, but then also just temperature changes, movement patterns by humans and boats, that can also cause it. So no bueno. That is a beautiful reef. Open ocean. So open ocean, it's the big, wide, big old ocean. And just like in lakes and ponds, there are different zones depending on like how far down deep you go as to what would probably live there. The photic zone is the zone towards the top, the surface of the water where the light can easily penetrate. The aphotic zone is what's underneath that. So again, the light doesn't get there. Things cannot undergo photosynthesis. Those producers are not going to be using light to do that. Instead, anything that lives down there, they produce their own. They're going to be what we call chemosynthesis type organisms. And it's really cool because they will use noxious gases and they will use that to convert into create into energy. And it's pretty cool. Those are some of the species that they're finding more and more, and we didn't think they really existed. Now that we know that we do, lots of more research is being done. In this picture here, it shows you the neritic zone is kind of up here almost to that intertidal area in the coral reef. And then once you get out here to the deeper ocean, you have your photic zone where you have the light can get through, and then everything down below. And that is it.